Welcome to the Peer Review Podcast, Fulfillment and Creativity in Academia. Together with my friend and colleague, Sarah Boonin-Benor, each episode brings us in conversation with fellow scholars and other experts on topics related to finding meaning in academia. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Rees Kassen. Rees Kassen is Professor of Evolutionary Biology at McGill University and Scientific Director of the Coronavirus in the Urban Environment Initiative, also known as CUBE. After completing his PhD in 2001, Rees did postdoctoral research at the University of Oxford, then joined the University of Ottawa in 2003. He moved to McGill in 2023. In addition to research and teaching, Rees is active at the interface between science, society, and policy, serving as director of the Trottier Institute of Science and Public Policy at McGill University. Welcome, Rees.
Thanks for having me, Mira.
And we go way back till we were, teenagers, 14, 15. We met in Vancouver, our hometown, before we were even in university, never mind pursuing a career in academia. So one thing we might talk a bit about is how you found this path. But first, tell us what it's like to be in STEM as a biologist, as you see it vis-a-vis your social science and humanities colleagues at the university, because it's something we've talked a little bit about.
Most of the time, it's absolutely wonderful, and I think that we all do our own thing. We all have our expertise. One of the things about being an evolutionary biologist is that sometimes some of the things we might think about actually butt up against social science issues, whether it's, in my case, the evolution of sex and gender. But for the most part, as a scientist, I take a very evidence sort of experimental sort of approach to this, rather than the sort of more critical lens approach that a social scientist might take.
It's interesting that you raised that, because maybe 10 years ago, you recommended a book to me that became one of my all-time favorite nonfiction books. And do you remember which one it was?
Was it Galileo's Middle Finger?
It was. Yeah. And it really encapsulates all the themes you're talking about, the relationship between science and social construction with regard to sex and gender, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be very honest with you, one of the reasons that drew me to evolutionary biology, and I wouldn't say this is the main one, but it was sort of the one that kind of tipped the balance, was I took a course on the biology of sex, which was offered through the biology department at my undergraduate university, Queen's, by a woman named Loreen Ratcliffe, whose research was studying behavior in birds and bird songs, and she worked in the Galapagos Islands, and just a fabulous researcher and a wonderful person. And she gave this course, and it just opened my eyes, because when you start thinking about things like the evolution of sex and sex roles in the natural world, it was just really like, wow, this is bloody cool. Like, there's so much going on there that we don't talk about.
And so when you're saying sex roles in the natural world among the birds and the bees, you don't mean constructed roles, like who's going to be in the kitchen?
It depends on what you count as constructed, I guess. But I mean, I don't know. The stuff that really attracted me was thinking about things like different ways in which sex is actually determined biologically in the natural world. Like typically we think of as biologists and geneticists, we would think of sex as having a chromosomal dimension, right? At least setting aside for the moment the sort of social constructs of what gender is, or how we express that. But at the same time, there are species, the coral reef fish, for example, whose sex is determined by dominance order on a reef patch, or turtles, where sex is determined by the temperature at which the eggs are incubated. Or you have seahorses, right, where talking about gender roles, right? The male nurtures and broods the offspring, taking what would typically be seen as a classic female role. So it was just kind of blew my mind, and I found that really fascinating. Although I don't study that stuff now, I teach about it, but
Hmm.
that was one of the things that sort of secured my deep interest in evolutionary biology and thinking about how these things actually came to be and why. Yeah.
Wow. Fascinating. And so you started by saying that sometimes your fields, your disciplines butt up in maybe partly generative, partly tense ways to some of the social science and humanities thinking these days. And what else?
Well, I think what I was thinking about in terms of the conflict points are actually was had less to do about the fields themselves and more about conversations that I've been grateful and lucky to be a part of over the past year or so at McGill around um, starting to think about what a university looks like for the 21st century, basically.
Yeah,
Um,
well, that
and
is huge.
yeah, it is a
Tell us
huge
more. I'm
thing.
glad you're working on that. Tell us
Well,
more.
we'll see. I mean, that's sort of my own little tagline or way
Hmm.
of thinking of framing it in my own head. Um, there's a number of us that have been brought together by the senior administration to sort of think about a new initiative that McGill is embarking on around the intersection between sustainability science and policy,
Hmm.
and so it includes both the hard sciences and infrastructure like labs and stuff like that, but it includes also thinking about um, how we might redesign the governance structures of universities to accommodate these very multi-dimensional and multifactorial problems that we're facing and that we need to confront, whether it's climate change, whether it's equity in health, or natural resources or whatever, and engaging not just across and with different disciplines within the university, but beyond the university, and stakeholders and
Hmm.
interest groups and community members and businesses and government. So it's been a really fun and stimulating series of conversations. And the vast majority of the people around the table are actually from STEM.
Hmm.
And the one social scientist in the room, keeps reminding us
Hmm.
to sort of check our assumptions. It was very valuable, but
Hmm.
the caricature of this can sometimes end up being that STEM is going to solve the problems, and then the social science community is going to be like, no, we just need a critical lens on this
Hmm.
before you do anything. And then that leads to really odd sorts of discussions because, like, well, what does it mean to have a critical lens? Like,
Hmm.
fine, you can critique this, but we got to do stuff. We got to do stuff here. And the world is expecting universities or wants universities. I don't think actually the world hasn't expected much of universities lately, or they're really disappointed in what universities have provided.
Hmm.
Um, and if we don't actually do things and start actually solving problems,
Hmm.
not just to satisfy our own curiosities, but to solve problems in the real world, we're going to be in real trouble. And so moving beyond the critical lens sort of narrative has been stimulating and challenging at times,
Hmm.
to say, well, what does this actually mean in practice if we're designing this new governance structure? What does it mean to really bring these different disciplines together in a productive way
Hmm.
um, to solve problems? So that's the sort of where sometimes there's tensions.
Hmm. No,
We have very
fascinating.
different views on what that means.
Can you give us an example of where a critical, so-called critical theory minded uh,
Yeah.
sociologist or historian or gender studies scholar might see something in a different way than a scientist?
I'll tell you the easiest place is just like language,
Hmm.
right? Like we all have disciplinary language, jargon, whatever we call it. And we all, as when we're trained in disciplines, we learn this language as a sort of shorthand
Hmm.
uh, for talking with our colleagues. And sometimes I tongue in cheek will say it's also a sort of a form of job protection,
Hmm.
because if you don't know the language, you don't know what the words means, and you can't have the conversations, right?
Right.
But in my field, just take an example from evolutionary biology. It's like, well, what do we mean when we say adaptation?
Hmm.
Okay. To an evolutionary biologist, adaptation means something very specific. It means a
Hmm.
genetic change in the population that increases the fit, if you like, between that population and the environment or whatever challenge that population is that lineage is facing. But adaptation means something quite different for a physiologist. And we don't even have to go outside of STEM, right? It often means an adjustment in how the body responds to a stress, right? We sweat when it gets hot, or we shiver when it gets cold. And adaptation in the context of climate discussions, means something quite different. And because it's part of an ongoing discussion and deliberation between whether the best way to respond to climate change is through mitigation or adaptation. Do we try and bring down CO2 levels globally to mitigate the effects of climate change, or do we adapt and just say it's going to happen, right? And now we have to reorganize our society. So
adapt our
yeah,
lifestyle
everything, our
to
economy, our the places we live,
the
how
reality of
the reality
temperatures
of a
rising or
1.5 degree warmer world at mid, right? And so a lot of the tensions arise through language, really.
Interesting. Yeah, because adaptation in and of itself is not a jargon term. It's a regular word, but it takes
That
on
too.
these different valences of meanings in different intellectual
Exactly.
traditions and different disciplines. And so I want to get back to your long-standing work in the public realm with public engagement and the intersection between the academy and government, etc. But before I do, you had a major career decision point 3 years ago when you decided to move universities at mid-career. You were already full
Or
professor,
mid-career.
so you had all the job security. You had a good, from I know, because we're buddies, a great work-life balance in terms of where your work was, your neighborhood, all the stuff, and yet you chose to seek out another opportunity. Tell us about that, because I think a lot of people wonder what it might be like to think of something new, even when they're not forced to.
Sure. I mean, to set the context, I guess, this is me being one of the lucky ones who's I got tenure, I got a position, and you're right, like, I had a pretty good life. My commute to work was along the canal in Ottawa. I could skate in the winter and I could cycle the rest of the time, or walk or run or do whatever. And I had great colleagues at the University of Ottawa. Um, the decision was, there's many things that went into this. One was, I think, just temperamentally, a feeling like, okay, I've kind of jumped through all the hoops that this life sort of confronts you with. I got tenure, I got the promotion to full. I still felt very energetic. I still do feel very energetic about my research, and I had been working for 10 plus years doing this engagement piece with policymakers, either in Ottawa and the Canadian federal government and internationally. And I really found a lot that very enriching, but it was really kind of off the side of my desk. So I had to balance those activities against my responsibilities to my colleagues and to the department and to the faculty and so on. So, and even being an engaged scientist and talking to my colleagues, I was getting a bunch of ideas that I thought might be fun and important and valuable to pursue. And I wasn't really getting the traction I had hoped within the institutional framework on those things. And so I was getting a little frustrated with that. And I would say that my former employer was spectacular to me in the early part of my career. Like, I really couldn't have asked for any better support as a researcher and as a young academic. And so I was a little frustrated, and then became a little like, well, what's changed? And I started to reach what I think is a very common thing in many professions, not just the academy, but what I've kind of come to call the mid-career malaise. It's sort of like, you've proven yourself, and because you've now got everything that you've worked so hard for, and what is it that's going to animate and incentivize and encourage and stimulate those creative juices in the second half of your career? And I had been thinking about a bunch of different opportunities, both at other universities and outside, potentially even the university, and some of which I pursued, some of which didn't work out, and so on. And in a conversation with a colleague at McGill, I was talking about this stuff, and my colleague said, "Oh, well, you should come to McGill. We could really use you.
Mm.
And so that sort of got me thinking, and then that started a conversation. And the biggest driver for me, well, there were two, I guess. One was McGill offered me the opportunity to regularize this policy and engagement piece as part of my job rather than off the side of my desk.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very innovative approach that they took, and because not a lot of places do this. I remain a scientist. When you introduced me as a professor of evolutionary biology, that's how I self-identify. I do the science policy stuff in addition to that.
Tell us a little more about what it means to you to work at the interface of science and policy.
Yeah, that's actually a great question because, as I said at one point, the science I do doesn't usually put me into the sort of conversations about, do we make this decision or that decision on whatever it is. The sort of motivator for me is that I want to try and rework what is sometimes called the two cultures, or rethink. So this was C.P. Snow back in the mid 20th century, who wrote an essay around the idea that science and the humanities, that we're really speaking very different languages. And I think you can extend that to many other things. The science community, the STEM community, and research in general, and I include the social sciences as well in there, is that especially because in Canada, where most of that work is focused around universities, seems out of touch. And when I talk to my academic colleagues, they're always frustrated because of some decision that the government has made that seems to have ignored the evidence. And they're highly, highly motivated to try and get their evidence into the decision-making process at some level. And at the same time, the policymakers, sometimes they have good evidence and sometimes they just don't know where to go get it. And so there's a sociology around that, which is that they don't interact very often. And we all speak very different languages, and our timelines are very different. Policymakers have to make decisions fairly urgently often. And whereas as academics, we have the luxury of sort of sitting with our ideas and thinking them over and reworking them, and it can take years. And this is what we're working on at the Institute a little, is trying to look for ways in which we can build better connections between these two communities so that we build networks that are trusted. We can convene people in productive ways around topical issues that have science at their core. I can give you an example if you want.
Sure.
Yeah. Right now, we're thinking this through on wildfire.
Mm.
Right. To what extent, do we try and suppress fire as we have for over the last 100 years? Early detection. There's a new series of satellites being launched by the federal government to do just that, early detection around wildfires. Do we need prescribed burns? It's actually a scientific topic that is not settled.
Whether forest fires in and of themselves can serve useful functions.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that they do in some habitats, and they're absolutely necessary in the dry semi-deserts like California and the Okanagan and so on and so forth. Those are fire-driven landscapes. But how do we design policies to perhaps support prescribed burns in a way that is respectful both of indigenous practices as well as private land owners, that's safe, and overlaying all of that are issues around smoke inhalation. We know that smoke of any kind is very damaging, and so there's a whole bunch of different issues here where there's science and policy that need to go hand in hand to make progress as we move into a phase of living with climate change that is going to lead to more frequent and often very much larger fires.
And have you found that you're able to speak policy language more effectively than you did?
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I think a large part of it is just people getting together and finding a way to convene and to interact and to build networks. So whether those are deliberative dialogues, whether they're I think less so on networking events, that doesn't sort of appeal to me as much, but actually finding ways to ensure that, and speaking back to our conversation around cooperation, or the that we had, cooperation in an evolutionary sense works when you interact repeatedly with somebody, because you learn to trust them,
Right.
right? So so that's what we were trying to do, is sort of reduce the barriers to trust between these two communities, in the spirit of actually making better decisions collectively. So what it means at McGill, my home department is the Department of Biology and the Faculty of Science, but I am half-time in the Faculty of Science and half-time with the Max Bell School of Public Policy in the Faculty of Arts. So my appointment is actually across two faculties, which is very unusual, at least so far as I can tell. So the other part is a more STEM focused thing, which is that the idiosyncrasies of the Canadian research system mean that it's hard to reinvest or retool your lab in some, or at least for some disciplines, if you don't move universities. So it's because of the funding rules and granting structures around how we support the equipment that we need for doing science. So the move, I was able to, manage to actually completely retool my lab and bring it up to sort of a level that it really needed to be at.
And just remind humanities and social science folks what it means to have a lab.
Oh, okay, yeah, right. I always forget about that. So, my day-to-day life when I'm in the science, when I'm in biology, is I run a research group of, yes, on average about 8 to 10 trainees of various career stages, from undergraduate up to postdoctoral researchers sometimes. So master's students and PhD students. For almost all STEM researchers, we get physical lab space to run our experiments. I grow microbes, and I watch microbes evolve in the laboratory. So I need incubators, and I need to make the media that they grow in. I need test tubes. I need, in this day and age, the other thing that we really need are genome sequencers. And we need places to store all this stuff. And so that's what the lab is.
So when you say a lab, I'm relieved that it involves test tubes, because then I can picture it,
Right.
what it actually is, because it is what it
Yeah,
sounds like.
it
And
is
so,
exactly.
and when you are a scientist, where running a lab is part of your job, that becomes part of your teaching. So do you tend to teach fewer courses than your humanities and social science counterparts?
So tell me, Mira, what do my humanities and social science colleagues, what does their teaching load? And I'll tell
Well,
you.
here at Carleton, it's 2 courses each semester, so 4 courses total.
Okay. So the general expectation, at least at McGill, is about one undergraduate course each semester. So yes, but that's in part because I have typically 6, 7, and 8, sometimes 10 master's or PhD or undergraduate students who are working towards a degree. And part of that work is actually running experiments in the lab, collecting and analyzing data, writing up their results, publishing it, and so on and so forth. So it's a much more apprentice mentor kind of model,
Right.
but it is bona fide teaching, just not in a classroom. So
Right.
so yes, that would be.
And what I find interesting, just comparing it to my field, is that when you're mentoring, you're getting assistance towards your own research as well, because it's a common research project that you're all working on to an
Yeah,
extent.
that's certainly the tradition in most of STEM fields. Certainly in my instance, the collaboration between me and my students is actually the part of my job that I love the most.
Hmm.
So it very much is, their success is my success, because we are both on the published output, or whatever that output is, uh, you know, um, and and so there's an alignment of goals, I guess
Hmm.
you could say, usually, not always, but usually. And it means that I spend a lot of time trying to think very carefully about the kind of environment that I want to curate, if you like, within my lab.
Hmm.
And that includes both the people that I invite in, um, as well as the opportunities that I can provide them through my colleagues in the department or my colleagues internationally, through conferences, through connections, through my networks, and so on.
Yeah, no, I'm a little envious of that setup because for my mentorships, I'm there to provide feedback on their drafts and mentor them, give them career advice to the extent I can, and write them letters of recommendation. But the collaboration is not as direct.
Yeah, no, this
So
is
it's
very
nice.
much, I can't physically do all the
Hmm.
things that I would want my lab to be doing because I
Hmm.
don't have the time.
Right.
So in
It's
the
very.
end, it's my students who are physically running the experiments almost all the time. And that might sound a little exploitative, and it can be that, there are situations where that can arise. I try and make sure that it isn't that way.
Hmm.
Um, if I show up in the lab and try and put on a lab coat, my students are like, "What the hell is he doing here?"
Hmm.
You know, but
They
I do
want, they
show
want,
up. Yeah,
yeah, hands
like,
off,
yeah,
Professor
they
Kassen.
know,
We've got this covered.
yeah, they know
Yeah,
way more than I do at
yeah,
this point. It's just the last time I actually was able to run a full experiment might have been 2010.
yeah. So
Like it's
tough.
embarrassing. I'm not proud of that, but that
Hmm.
is, you know, but one of the things I provide to them is obviously the years of experience working in the field and thinking about the problems, and they're just starting in that. So together we actually try and usually do produce some pretty what we think is pretty exciting stuff.
Hmm.
So whether the world does or not is not always in our control, but
Nice. Now that's the lab component of your teaching. Tell us a bit about your classroom teaching. What's
sure.
your vibe? What's your style? What makes a semester go well from your perspective versus can't wait till it's over? We've all had both types, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's a good question because having moved, I'm kind of, and because I'm moving at a mid-career stage, people know who I am in terms of my research strengths, but I'm also seen a little bit as a sort of Swiss Army knife
Hmm.
of teaching in biology, at least,
That
because
they can slot you anywhere and you'll get it done.
yeah,
You'll open the bottle of wine as needed. You'll open the can of olives,
yeah, in a
light a
sense, yeah,
fire.
it's actually a wonderful experience because you kind of show up and the people are like, "Oh, Rees, we could really use a few lectures in this course, and what about some lectures in this course? And
Mm.
maybe you want to co-teach this one or co-coordinate this one, or and I would say it's an embarrassment of riches, and I'm having a difficult time navigating this, and I have to rely on my chair a little bit to help.
Hmm.
But so far, I love teaching and undergraduate teaching. I love being up and in front of a group,
Hmm.
a group of students, a classroom. I like I try and be as interactive as I can.
So are
For
these the like 1,000 person lecture halls we picture in introductory science?
it has been when I was at my previous university, I was teaching intro to organisms, and that was 1,000 plus students.
Wow.
I didn't. I can do that. The lecturing part is easy to do, and I can have fun with that. The classroom management
Hmm.
and sort of um, all the administrative side of running a course that big is something that absolutely wears me down and I really dislike. But right now I've been teaching our one of the intro classes in ecology and evolution.
Hmm.
So this is first and second year students in biology. There's about 120 or 140,
Hmm.
and then a third year course in focused on evolutionary biology. It's about 70 students, and we get I it works best when I get to talk about the stuff I really love.
Hmm.
The evolution of sex. I just finished a lecture yesterday on pathogen evolution. Um, I didn't get to it this year, but often I talk about the evolution of cooperation. You know,
Mm.
why, why would you ever, in a Darwinian sense, why would anybody help each other out, right?
Hmm.
If it costs you energy and resources to help out a neighbor or a relative, it doesn't make Darwinian sense. So it's just fascinating series of problems. One of the
Hmm.
fun things about evolutionary biology is it's about the why, not always the how. I mean, it's also
Hmm.
about the how, but it's about why did this happen?
Hmm.
So anyway, I won't go
You're treading on my turf here because a big
on.
part of international relations theory was to understand
Sure.
how to incentivize states to cooperate. And we looked at some of the cell, I think it was down to the cellular level research, if I recall correctly, in
Well, I mean, this is
biology.
where one of these convergence points between
Hmm.
STEM and social sciences, right,
Hmm.
is game theory, right?
Exactly.
Like how do you negotiate, for example? How do you ensure that you actually cooperate? What is the right thing to do in a situation where you're faced with uh, a choice to cooperate or not?
Mhm.
Um,
So, on that note, getting people to cooperate for a collective good, a lot of your work has, as you said earlier, entailed interfacing with the public, with government. Around COVID, you were very involved and you remain involved as the director of the Public Policy School. Tell us a bit
yeah,
about what motivates you. What motivated you at the very beginning to look
yeah,
outside the walls of the university and engage these other actors?
yeah.
And tell
There
us
were
a bit
two.
about what you're doing in
Sure.
that realm.
Sure. There were two things that started it. One was just a perennial fascination with the relationship between science and the world. And part of the reason that evolutionary biology spoke to me as a student was uh, the sort of idea that Stephen Jay Gould would write about quite often, historian and paleontologist from Harvard, that if you take this grand view of the history of life on Earth from 3.5 billion years ago to now, you have to recognize that 99.9% of all species that have ever existed in that time are now extinct.
Mm,
So if you're part of the 0.1% that's still here, you're an evolutionary success. And it doesn't matter whether you're single celled or multi celled, you walk on two legs or four, your skin color is pink or brown or whatever. And I thought, oh, this is the best argument against discrimination and racism I've ever heard. So
mm,
I thought the diversity of life is the best argument against discrimination. And so I decided to study the evolution of biodiversity. That's what I
mm,
so that sort of was an intersection between the science and the world that really spoke to me. And I've always had a fascination for how science thinks about things and how the world outside of science thinks about things. So that was number one. The other was because I committed myself to being an evolutionary biologist, we and the stuff that really got me interested were these very foundational questions around how does diversity evolve? Like like these are not at the coal face kinds of questions. I'm not being hauled into the minister of natural resources to talk about the collapse of the cod fishery or the spotted owl or something like that. I'm talking the work that I do as a scientist is very much the sort of framing architecture for thinking about all those other things. It's the stuff that goes into textbooks rather than
mhm,
helps make policy decisions. And the value, I think there's high value in that, and I love it. But I was also get frustrated because even if I had a very successful paper, if I was honest with myself, maybe 5 to 10 people would really change how they think about the world
mhm,
around
mhm,
around my work. And so I saw, because of my interest in sort of the social side of science, and the philosophy of science and the sociology of science, I saw an opportunity to actually have a bigger impact as a scientist working in these policy spaces. So, not so much about what the science says about a particular problem, but how we might organize ourselves to help science say important things about the world.
Okay, so now I have another question. How do you find new questions to ask in a field that is so full of findings already, let's just say?
Oh, wow. I mean, look, that's what makes life as an academic worth living, right? It's the
Mm,
creativity part. One of the things about evolutionary biology as a field is that so much of it, if I meet somebody on the street and or at a cocktail party or cafe or something, and they ask me, what do I do? I say, well, I'm an evolutionary biologist. Probably the first thing that comes to mind is dinosaurs,
hmm.
right? For the most part, the discipline of evolutionary biology has been a retrospective kind of science.
Hmm.
How do we explain how we got to now from
Hmm.
what has happened before?
Right.
So dig up fossils, or we try and use other kinds of information to make inferences about how things have evolved. Um, I was lucky enough as a student to get on board this a sort of a new approach to thinking about evolution, which was to watch it actually unfold in the laboratory using bacteria and other small things because they divide really quickly, where we can actually look prospectively. So that opened up a whole bunch of questions that when you sort of scratch the surface of the evidence and the theoretical ideas and tried to match the two, you're like, this doesn't quite work. Like actually there's a lot of room here for really unanswered questions. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. And then the other side of things that really drives thinking a lot, there's a bunch of them, but one is technology. When I started in 2003, the idea of genome sequencing anything was sort of still a pipe dream. And that's, now I can get a bacterial genome in the lab within probably less than 24 hours. Wow. For less than $100 about. So that's really transformed and opened up a whole new, it's in a sense like a better microscope, right? We can see in more detail what's happening at the genetic level. And the other thing that I think drives it is just, there a lot of, although my work is very foundational and fundamental, and the questions have been around for a long time, the lens through which we try and look at those questions is really about practical problems in human health or environmental health, whether it's thinking about the conditions under which we might be able to protect biodiversity in a conservation biology mindset, or thinking about why certain pathogens become more damaging than others or more problematic for patient populations, or the spread of antimicrobial resistance, for example, and how we might know. So, although I do very foundational work, it's through that lens, and those problems are of high urgency sometimes, especially during COVID, but not exclusively.
Absolutely. Okay. Tell us before we wrap up, what does your ideal workday look like?
It's a mix, and it changes throughout the year. So I've just finished on Friday an intensive teaching period. And that was very satisfying, in part because there's a lot of content creation. And so as hard as that can be, when you've done it, you feel very good about it. It's a bit like chopping wood. For an academic, it's about as close as we get as to getting our hands dirty.
Right.
And, it's gratifying when students transmit some kind of appreciation for what you've taught, or you just look out into that sea of faces and you go, oh, I see something's landing. Like somebody, at least one person in this audience is like getting really excited in the way that I get excited about this. So I like that. I love deeply, one of the things I love about being a PI and working with all these students is I have a lot of admiration for my students most of the time. Sometimes they can be frustrating, as all people can, and I'm sure I'm frustrating to them. But they come to me with their data. So they've done an experiment or they've done an assay of something, and I get to sit down and with them, and we get to think about this stuff. And that really I love doing that part of the work. I love having written, not necessarily writing.
Yeah, I'm all over that grammatical construction.
Yeah, I was just talking to my younger son about this the other day. Apparently, he's got quite a talent for writing, even though I don't think he reads very much.
Great.
But we just had parent-teacher conference. But he's like, I don't like writing. But, well, maybe let's rephrase this and remember that writing's hard for everybody.
Yeah, that's true.
So, I like being a scholar. I like really engaging in what Bruno Latour used to call the parliament of ideas. And that's, I love ideas, and so that really excites me. And then the other thing that I like, honestly, the policy stuff, like I love spending time in the policy school. It's like a mini Oxford or Cambridge high table. I have colleagues from all different disciplines, and they are very much at the coalface in their fields. And they are very warm and receptive and excited about what the scientific perspective can bring to what they're doing. And that's really been welcoming and encouraging.
And how do you, just down to the
Yeah.
day-to-day level, how do you interface with them? Is it formally, informally, water cooler, meetings, projects?
It's early days, but it's all of that. Just in practical terms, the policy school here at McGill tends to use Wednesdays as the day when everybody is physically there. And that includes, there's a lot of people who commute from either Toronto or Ottawa to Montreal, professors of practice or other, fellows in the school. And so there is a lot of water cooler conversation. We have, guest speakers and all that sort of thing.
And any hobbies that help you blow off steam that you want to recommend to your peers?
Oh, I mean, I happen to surf and ski and cycle and play hockey, and I'm active.
You forgot tennis. We've
Tennis
played a few
as well.
times.
Yes,
I've
yes.
been humbled by your serve.
What I say to my students when I first meet them is, the academic life, it can really wear you down. It's if you let that competitive aspect become too prominent in your world, you're not gonna be a happy person. And the way I kind of try and manage that, I guess, is, and it's not even so much about competition, it's more just about being a professional. I think it's about, I want to do things outside of work that allow me to be the best person I can be at work. I find exercise is really important for that because it helps me clear my mind and focus. And so I say to my students, look, I'm not standing at the door of the lab with a clipboard going, it's 9:15 in the morning and so-and-so's not here yet or something. It's like, you do what you need to do the best kind of work that you can do when you're here and when you need to do it. And in the rest of your time, you look after yourself in whatever way feeds you. I love going to the theater, believe it or not. I don't do it as much as I'd like, but, or there's 1,000 different things that feed me. So it's one of the luxuries about being in the academic world, right? Is that you can often have access to a whole bunch of stuff that feeds you. And I like.
And speaking of theaters, you and I went on a date when we were 15 to a movie theater in Oak Ridge Mall, which is undergoing construction right now.
Rest in peace, Oak Ridge Mall. It's not there anymore.
Rest in peace. And then there's going to be some new mall, and this is in Vancouver, and we still don't remember what the film was, but it was in 1988. Maybe we should go through some old archives of Vancouver Sun and see what was playing there. That could be a research project. So Rees, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to speak with someone who is really hitting it out of the park in teaching, research, and service and public engagement, and it's exciting to see. So it's been wonderful chatting with you, and be well. And I'll see you around the tennis courts.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
The Peer Review podcast is produced and hosted by Sarah Bunin-Benor and Mira Sukharov. Talia Ehrenberg is assistant producer and editor. The music is written and performed by the Galactic Ambassadors. Support for this podcast comes from a faculty grant from Hebrew Union College. If you would like to sponsor an episode, you can reach us at peerreview@huc.edu. You can join the conversation on Facebook at Peer Review, Cultivating Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia. Thank you for listening.